So these are the definitions that I have written down, and please let me know if anybody disagrees, would like to redefine, just so we're all on the same page moving forth with this discussion. So individualism can be defined as a social pattern that consists of loosely linked individuals who view themselves as independent of collectives, or a society in which the ties between individuals are loose. Everyone is expected to look after him or herself and possibly the immediate family. Collectivism is a society in which individuals from birth onwards are part of a strong in-group, usually the family, extended family, etc. Let me go ahead and admit people in. Okay, and collective, extended family, village, tribe, etc. Collectivism can also be defined as a society that consists of exclusionists, people who exclude and classify others as either part of an in or out group. If they are an out group, they're excluded. This is collectivism. If they are an in group, they're included. Collectivism has to do with we, individualism has to do with I, right? So the differences between individualism and collectivism that I see are individualism has competition between different groups, and individualism has competition between individuals. Individualism or collectivism is where relationships come first and tasks come second. Individualism is where tasks come first and relationships may come afterward. Collectivism is where harmony is key. Confrontations within the in-group cannot be had and pose a threat to the group. Individualism is where confrontations can be healthy and they do no harm. In some ways, confrontations create competition, which in turn may yield creative or technological advancement. So some examples of individualist countries are US, Australia, UK, Netherlands, Denmark, France, Germany. Collectivism countries, India, Japan, probably not today, not Japan today, Russia, Arab countries, China, etc. So that's what I have for my definition. Now let me stop sharing the screen here.
Joe, if I can chip in, I'm from Korea. People ask me where I'm from. As a joke, I say I'm from East Korea. There is no East Korea. There is currently South Korea and North Korea. So many people assume Korea as collectivist society. In many ways, according to what Joe read, it belongs there. But when we hear collectivism, we think of most people, North Korea, communism. So the word has a nuance to, I'm not arguing what Joe is trying to streamline here for the sake of conversation. But as a Korean, let's say I'm speaking English as a second language, but when we hear collectivism, we abhor that word because it associates North Korea, Korean War, and bloody wars, things like that, just as a reference.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So you kind of abstain from using that word. All right. So Steinbeck touches on both of these in his book, The Individualism and Collectivism. He depicts a Western, but also a very American way of thinking, one that very much appeals to people as individuals. The individual doesn't have to be devoted or subservient to anything else but himself, for example. There is no larger good than a single person's own good and your own happiness. So let's begin the discussion. I'll ask everyone to, so first what we're going to do is we're going to have about 10 or 15 minutes, let's say, of conversation here with everyone. And I'll encourage everyone to raise their hand. Then we're going to break off into smaller groups for about 45 minutes. And then we're going to come back to the larger group. So that's sort of the structure we have today. I'll ask everyone to do a few things, some guidelines here as far as the group with everyone. Speak your mind, raise your hand when you want to say something. You can also put an exclamation mark in the comments if you don't know how to raise your hand. Keep on topic and be brief. So let's, so on topic means, let's try to stick with the theme of individualism versus collectivism. How does it relate to the book? How does it relate to today? And that's kind of what I mean by on topic. So yeah, I guess individualism versus collectivism. So let's begin. What are the positives and negatives of either of these societal modes? How can we see these traits in the novel? And how can we see these traits in our global Western society today? Some people aren't from the West, so that'd be interesting to get their point of view. But as far as the book goes, what do we see? So does anyone want to start us off?
I could start us off. If you'd like, I can start.
Yeah, Larry.
I think context is very important. The book was published in 1940, and the Depression was still very much evident. And this book is a complete condemnation of capitalism as it was practiced in the United States. And you could see that he's talking about a need for a social safety net. And we're still having this discussion today, from Social Security to Medicare, and on and on and on. And the Joad family is obviously a decent family, and he doesn't get into why this happened. Obviously, there was a drought. They might have been planting the wrong crops, but they're decent people. Bad things happened, and that can happen to any of us. Bad things happen to people, and through the years, we've what should the relationship? How involved should the government be in our economic life? And we're still having this argument today over, the Ayn Rand, as somebody mentioned before, would say, get the government out of the way. Ronald Reagan would say, get the government out of the way. No regulations, low taxes, on and on and on. Whereas Steinbeck at the time was saying, wait a second, we need a social safety net. And obviously, Social Security and all other types of social safety nets were created as a result of the Depression. And we're debating it right now in our contemporary world. The other thing that I found interesting is these are migrants who are going to California, and they're considered outsiders. And we're still dealing with this today, except we have immigrants coming. They are outsiders. I remember the former president calling them rapists and whatever. I was saying, wait a second. People coming here, outsiders, and I think Steinbeck was very aware that outsiders are perceived as problematic. And what I like about the book is that in 1940 USA, he completely looks at the economic setup here, and he condemns it. He says, this is no good. People are being abused and exploited. Decent people are being taken advantage of. And he gets into government oversight, unions for sure. And there's certainly a spiritual element to the book with the character of JC, I forget his name, that, it should be we instead of I, that type of thing. So that's why I asked before, is the book on a banned book list? Because the book is definitely advocating for a type of socialist. It's not individual or collective. There's a middle ground. And I think that's what we in America are always looking for. What role should the government play in our economic life? And that's the political debate that goes on today. And I think Steinbeck kind of saw it very strongly, especially with the Great Depression in 1940.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So this book isn't completely individualistic or collective. It's sort of talking about a balance, and I think that's important. Thank you, Larry. Barbara.
As Larry pointed out, the concepts individualism and collectivism are really a spectrum. So it's not an opposition, either you're individualist or collectivistic, but that you're somewhere along a line. And I think what's interesting about the book is that the character of Tom is the one who moves along that line most clearly, I think, from something like individualism to something a lot more like collectivism. And I think his journey really tells us a lot about what Steinbeck was thinking. Obviously, there's all these political considerations, and Steinbeck did not back off from any of it. But he's also got a morality play going here, and he has Tom at the center of it. And what's the other character's name? The preacher. So we're seeing not just what's politically expedient or whether big government should do policies X or policies Y, but what is right and what is wrong. And Tom seems to be right at the intersection of all that. So he's an interesting character to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. So maybe you can say that the chaos is coming from the top down. Steinbeck is saying, but the solution is bottom up. Yeah, maybe. Okay, so Fred.
I think at the time, and to a large extent now, there are several possible sources of authority and social support that we can consider. One is the individual, where every person relies on himself. The second is the nuclear family. The third is church. The fourth is local community, particularly friends and acquaintances. And the fifth is government. And in the extreme, we could say that the individual is individualist. The collective, as we often consider it, is government. And I think this book, Grapes of Wrath, very definitely posits that the primary source for the Jodes of authority and support is the nuclear family, or perhaps slightly extended family. I don't think it has much to say, actually, about the role of government. It certainly does about trade unions, but not much at all to say about the role of government, except as police acting on behalf of owners by breaking up unions. That may parenthetically be considered some aspect of local government, but certainly not federal government. But the primary source of support here is the family, not so much the individual. Individuals work on, in this book, work on behalf of the family. Yeah. And secondarily, it posits that trade unions should have an important role in the organization of labor. But I don't see much here that either condemns a separate individual working on his own initiative, or that supports or condemns a primary role of centralized government, federal government, for the planning of economies. And
did you ever read The Grapes of Wrath?
Yes, I did.
Oh,
sorry.
Elle, can you please mute yourself?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
No problem.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was very rude.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's understandable. I appreciate
Okay,
it.
go on, Fred.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
actually, I'll just leave it there.
Okay, no problem, Elle. Let's see. P Doe.
Oh, hey, dude. Yeah, that's me. My name's Peter.
Cool.
I got to be real with you. After that disrespect that was just shown to Fred, I think that's got to be me out of here. Individualism, collectivism, we all fucked up.
Oh, hey, that was a just a mistake. No worries. Okay, Tova.
So I think that, like, while I really love this idea of trying to dissect what and how, I guess this book argues for a collectivist versus individual lens. Like, I think even more, not importantly, but even more significant to this understanding of this binary, not juxtaposition, but kind of spectrum, is like the fact that naturalism was very much the way in which this book was written, very consciously by Steinbeck. So this idea that, like, he was arguing for the middle, like the lower working class, in most analysis of this book, it's describing these, like, people, these family members, as, like, pretty much part of the land to which they are working on. So the shining red earth, the attempt to escape the harsh and natural economic determinism of their homeland. The dust is a product of the earth, and it, like, exemplifies the Jode's suffering. From my opinion is that I don't think that he's, like, saying, like, yes, rebel. Like, I think that's definitely coming in time historically for books to speak to that. But I think naturalism or naturalistic writing is more about showing that people are very much shaped by the world that they are a part of, and that, as try as they might, they can't fight against forces that are bigger than themselves. So I was wondering if anyone kind of looked into naturalistic writing as it, or analysis as it goes to this book, and or I guess Emile Zola's first person who came up with this label. But you don't have to answer that question right now.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Tova. Dave. Laura, can you mute yourself, please?
Laura, mute yourself, please. Wait, I have not read the book. I did see the movie. I grew up in Kansas. I am just a mere 74 years old, so I was not alive then, but my parents were. I read an excellent book called The Secret Gift about the Great Depression, and an excellent Ken Burns documentary called The Dust Bowl. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about the background about what's going on, especially the Dust Bowl. You hear in Egypt the 7 fat years and 7 lean years. In 1914, World War I was going on in Europe, and they were trying to feed all these armies. So there was a great demand for wheat. And this area used to be called the Great American Desert. But for 6 or 7 years, they got adequate rainfall and they had wonderful wheat crops. So I think people were rushing to that area to get rich, actually. And then, as you said, it turned to drought. And so a lot of people lost their land. And the other part of it, and this just may be a rumor, but people from California didn't come up to the telephone poles and put signs up, jobs in California. The rumor is that the local, mayor and, town council, whatever, knew they didn't have enough money to support all these people. So they put up these signs that jobs in California. So the Okies, as they were called, they did the Great Migration with the hope of a better life. Francis Perkins was in Franklin Roosevelt's administration and urged him to do this New Deal stuff. And I think we got a lot of very valuable safety net things. As far as the capitalism thing, I'm a liberal and I have a socialist friend that says, well, everybody should be living off the land, no government, just farm yourself. And so I don't know how we get 747s and things like that. But so I think we need a combination of capitalism and a social safety net. But thanks, I'm looking for a good discussion tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Mike?
Okay. Took a minute to unmute. System is not responsive tonight, but that's all right. I contrast this book to Atlas Shrugged, and both of them indicate, as I think Dave pointed out, that you have to have a balance or between modern monetary theory, a safety net, and the concept of how we handle our politics and 5-year plans. There was some character, and I won't mention his name, who in 1929 we had a stock market crash, and the stock market crash, it went down 23%. By 19 and that caused a whole list of companies to cut back, and unemployment went up to 7%. And the New Deal and the campaign of 1932 that swept both houses of Congress and the presidency into New Deal land. They said, somebody in the recent election said that in 1929 Roosevelt went on television and calmed the fears of the nation. Well, except for the fact that Roosevelt wasn't in 1929 and they didn't have television in 1929. By 1932, employment was down below 4% unemployment, and the stock market had recovered about 75% of its original value after the crash. And then we came in with the New Deal, and the New Deal had some good effects. It built a lot of buildings in D.C. and a lot of post offices throughout the nation and got people back to work. But by 1939, when this book was written, and it's a 600-page book that was written in 5 months in longhand without a word processor. And at that point, by 1938, every single company in the Dow Jones Industrial Average was out of business except one, and that company was General Electric. And General Electric permeated our civilization through World War II and even now. But what ended up happening is that New Deal moved the unemployment rate to 70%, closed all the banks crashed, all the banks, because we didn't have a federal depository insurance, and we were in a world of hurt. It wasn't until World War II started that we got back to full employment and because of a kind of an implementation of modern monetary theory, because monetary theory is a fiction, because money is a fiction, and the confidence of the nation was what has happened. Now I'll wind up real quick. Russia, Soviets banned this book because it showed that even poor people had radios and cars. And so they banned this book. It was banned in this country because it was communist. It was banned in Russia because it it showed that even the poor people were doing pretty well. So we need the same balance that several people have said in order to do that. Capitalism needs to be restrained. Socialism needs to be restrained. And the rule of law has to be there so people know where they're going. Russia had their version of the Depression was far worse than ours. They ended up losing not just unemployment. They lost about 25% of their population due to famine.
Yeah.
And that was the 5-year plan that said we're going to avoid the Depression by the iron hand of communism. And Freud, who was still alive at that time, said that socialism is a mental disorder, and he provided how to treat it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Great historical context there. Thank you. Abraham?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Yeah, I didn't know what happened there in Soviet Union. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. It was very silent. Regarding to the notion, Tova's notion of naturalism, and first of all, I didn't read the book. However, the reason I joined the group is John Steinbeck and Hemingway's, 2 American writers that how can I say, touched me deeply. I read the East of Eden when I was in high school. After reading that book, it was translation. The book haunted me. I don't know how many days. So, and last year I had a chance to read the book again. So to give you some context, according to Wikipedia, the Grapes of Wrath was written 1938, but the East of Eden was written 1952. So, based upon my understanding of his writing, East of Eden, I didn't see any so-called collectivist orientation. What I saw was vivid description of not just nature and human behavior and psychology in a different way. So it was so real, more real than many good movies. So I think it haunts people like he did to me again. So that's just the point I wanted to bring up. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Abraham. Barbara?
Well, I was thinking 2 things. One, Fred made the comment that he wasn't sure that he saw much about top-down government, any critique of that in the book. And I think that the critique is there, and it's there loud and clear, really, in my estimation, because the problem that they had to do with real estate speculation and the way, just in general, the way the government policies still allow, but not the way they did then, people to speculate in land and skew things that way. Let's just put it that way. So I think that while it's not front and center, it is there. the government is implicated. And also they tried to make camps for the people, but their outreach was kind of ineffective, and that might have been another form of critique. And then the other thing I was thinking is Tova was saying that this was a naturalist book, and that's a technical discussion. But I think that if you want to equate naturalism and determinism, then you see this book kind of cut against that, even though it does portray people in some way beaten down by their environment. You also see people rise above it. You see Tom, well, it's questionable, right, what happens to him, but he's a character that does not just succumb to forces. And the book ends on a kind of a hopeful, crazy, I think, but a sort of communitarian note, where people are, where the message seems to be people have to come together and then they can overcome, even if that individual gesture is futile. Gestures one upon the other and the other and the other will eventually create change. So this book is really about change, and that would take it, I think, out of the naturalist camp and into some other camp. But that's just a technical thing. We could argue about that all day.
Yeah, yeah. I would classify this under American realism, kind of neo-American realism. But so let's go. But it is interesting to kind of see this in a naturalistic, read this book in a naturalistic way. All right, so let's go Dan and then Joe, and then let's break into groups here.
Hi, I enjoy Grapes of Wrath, and I might differ about the issue whether or not it's natural. I think most of its symbolism is natural. The dust storm, the dead dog, the dead baby, the land turtle, all of those are like naturalistic symbols that push the story forward. So, and I do read the book as something ecological. So it is people responding to nature. And I see it less like biblically allegorical for that reason. But what comes to mind about this story is that the story presents this idea of individualism and collectivism as a polemic. And I've always had a problem with that, partially because I'm familiar with Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And he came up with what was called the stag hunt dilemma, where he details two hunters competing over a rabbit to feed their families. And one family will get their lunch and one family will not, so long as they compete. But these hunters, they encounter a very large stag or male deer, and they realize that by cooperating with one another, they could both feed both their houses. They can cut that animal in half, and they can't do it alone. They couldn't bring the animal down alone, but together in cooperation, they would. But they first have to give up their selfishness. And I think The Grapes of Wrath is beautiful because it asks the polemic between the idea of selfishness and kindness. So that was all.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I didn't think to relate this to the Rousseauian thinking. That's very interesting. Thank you. Joe?
I mean, there's been so much said already about the roles of individualism and collectivism. I think that so I'm just going to try and add something else in there, is the idea of misaligned incentives as well. And in particular, the profit motive that exists with these banks and how that actually impacts behavior overall. And this is where we kind of like, when you have misaligned incentives, that inevitably people are going to get exploited. And I think that that's something that we have to really kind of consider when we evaluate, whether it be this book or any kind of system in general, is that when people are given a reason to exploit other people, then all of a sudden it becomes rugged individualism. And when it becomes rugged individualism, then that's where all of a sudden it becomes exploitative, and the system itself kind of collapses in on it. It kind of collapses in on itself. And so there you have then a swing back the other way, where people will move towards something, another extreme, like communism or something along those lines. And I think that that is what the real problem is that you're seeing the differences between these extremes and this misaligned incentives and any kind of, and how power structures overall kind of people get caught in the crosshairs of those two. So it's like, that's just something, the misaligned incentives and profit motives is something that I just wanted to kind of bring up because nobody had mentioned it yet.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, I'm going to read just a short quote from the book, and then we're going to break it into groups, and hopefully we'll have some good discussions there. So when kind of sort of at the end of the book, when Tom decides to leave the family, remember, he's talking to Ma, and he's saying he's been thinking about Casey a lot, the preacher, right? He says one time he went out in the wilderness. He's talking about Casey, the preacher, to find his own soul, and he found he didn't have no soul that was his. Says he just got a little piece of a great big soul. Says a wilderness ain't no good, because his little piece of a soul wasn't no good unless it was with the rest and was whole. And he goes on to say, two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him that is alone when he falleth. So I think that's that quote sort of is good. It sort of epitomizes the theme that we're talking about, and one of the main themes that Steinbeck is trying to elucidate in his book. So let's. Someone's asking me to type that. I'm just going to tell you the chapter. Let's see here. So, thank you. Okay. So I do have some questions that I wrote about the book. I sent them in the chat. So the first one I wrote, and maybe we can kind of start from here, is do we agree with Steinbeck's sort of, you could even call it an ugly portrayal of American big businesses keeping the masses down, and this hyper individualization? Do we agree with this critique, or do we say, well, you know, he has some good points, but really what we have going on right now, the free market and the individualism, it's the best we can do. So does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I find it problematic to accept that, because there might be another perspective, in the way that the big business in this book, I get the feeling that it's represented as the big fish in the pond, and that nature is very cruel. It's very abject. It doesn't have a sense of kindness about itself. Also, there's a bit of except for these scenes where people die because they try to contend with the powers that be. There are those moments where people try to be individuals and stand out, but they always get hit and beaten down for that reason. And it seems to me that it's very similar to how you might say that ecologies in lakes, what is that background? Is that Mike? Okay. Lakes, they grow an ecosystem where the largest fish has a tendency to dominate the lake. But when the adolescent fish grow to the point of maturity where they're getting as big as the big fish have a tendency to take that out because they become threats to the status quo or threats to the ecosystem for which, you know, the previous fish that had matured was enjoying the benefits of it.
Mm-hmm.
But that just means that I'm following the naturalistic narrative of the story.
Okay. Yeah, good point. I'm trying to see here. Okay, so Mike.
Well, there is a lot written on what caused the Depression in the United States and what caused that to become a worldwide depression. Some of it was, as was pointed out earlier, was climate change. The Dust Bowl created a situation throughout the world where we had essentially a worldwide famine that made food scarce. That was complicated by some amateurish attempts to stabilize the monetary system by an early version of the Federal Reserve System, which was supposed to bail out the banks and create a cushion so that bank failures wouldn't result as a domino effect. That was also complicated by the fact that after the displacement of World War I, created international economic problems and convinced Germany that they ought to inflate their way out of reparations. The Treaty of Versailles didn't help any. So we had a situation, and Bernanke wrote a book on what he thought caused the Depression in the United States. There have been various attempts at revising monetary policy, which are still running. There's still a lot of disagreements as to how that can either fix the problem or make it worse. So we're not out of the woods yet. There's a one of the books that was this time it's different. This time it's different, and then they go back to the depression that occurred at the end of the Appomattox or the Peloponnesian War. They go back to the statement of what happened with the tulip bulb crash, where tulip bulbs became a commodity. And they then, tongue-in-cheek, say, this time it's different. And there are those who say this time, potentially, it's likely to be even worse than it's ever been. Although that's very few people will sign up to that now, but after the fact, everybody's going to say, I told you so. So we do have some issues, and the tendency to make this country a socialist country, despite the fact that socialism has killed more people because it degenerates, the socialist dream degenerates into a fascist dictatorship every time it's been tried, So we do need intelligent balance between these forces, and we don't have it yet, but maybe we'll get it come November 2022. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Abraham?
Yeah, it's interesting. After Mike, the words, I say things twice, so I learned from you. Okay, it's coincidence. Regarding the what you said, Joe, a moment ago, paraphrase 2 is better than 1. Is 2 is collectivism. I type on the chat. That's actually from the book of Ecclesiastes, Bible, and the John Steinbeck was a believer. He was attending Episcopal Church, as far as I know, and also the book, the East of Eden, is metaphor and analogy from the book of the Bible. So there is some conflict when we talk about individualism versus collectivism. Where is the room for Christianity, Christian value? Does it promote individualism, or does it promote collectivism? For example, when the Mao Zedong, Stalin the same, when they got the power, North Korea the same, one of the first things they did is not only killing intellectuals and the so-called haves, they killed priests and Christians recklessly because they cannot control them. So in that regard, I would argue Christianity is not promoting the type of collectivism promoted by, let's say, communism or some extreme socialism. Yeah, that's my observation.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good thought. I do have something to say on that. I mean, there are people who do believe that Christianity has paved the way to individualism in the West, mainly because it emphasizes the worth and free choice of the individual soul, quote unquote. So it rejects altogether any means of salvation which deals with men in a mass. It brings the individual face to face with God. Christianity does, and so in that sense, is true that Christianity is individualistic and not social. Other people have argued that that Kant and Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, and Christianity are both proponents of individualistic thought, and I won't get into that, but yeah, I have heard that argument. Okay.
I think Larry wants to go.
Larry?
Yeah, I take issue with that a little bit. I think in the book, the preacher, his initials are JC, he's Christ. And what he preaches is that we are dependent and interconnected with one another, that the idea of individuality is a fantasy, that we are dependent on each other for the food we eat, for the clothes we wear, for everything. And he tells them that we have to get away from the I and get to the we. And I think Christianity is much more of a collective ideology, that we are dependent on each other for everything. I mean, if you think about the homes we live in, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, we are dependent on others for those things. And the idea of each individual kind of using one another is a violation of that of Christianity. So I think, I'm a little surprised that there hasn't been more, the book has a political message and a religious message, especially the ending with the flood. And I think the character of the preacher is central here, JC.
Yeah.
He tells them we have to look out for one another. We have to, we're dependent on each other. We're not isolated individuals. That's a very powerful illusion that we live under. And I think there is a certain truth to that, I look around me and I say, everything that I have has been dependent on other people providing it. And I think that's kind of where JC is going with this. He plants that message in Tom's head, that this idea of isolated individuals, rugged individualism is a myth, a very powerful one, but not real. And I think it's a central part of the book.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. His initials are JC, and that's purposeful, right? He did it on purpose. Although one could argue that Jim Casey did lose his faith before coming to the realization that he is part of a bigger thing than himself, right? Barbara?
It's hard to resolve that question of religion. I think we got off the topic of whether capitalism is bad. But just to speak to what Larry was saying, I think you have to remember that while there's a certain, that the Reformation did emphasize the person's personal relationship with Christ, with God or something, churches have always been a communion of saints. So it's always underlying that idea that you're in it with a whole lot of other people, living and dead. And the Catholic Church especially is like that. So you can think of, I guess what would be emblematic of that would be Dante's Divine Comedy, where you see the whole, you see the people in hell, you see the people in purgatory, the people in heaven, and Dante himself, who's still alive, all connected. And so I think that there is a communitarian idea to Christianity that you can't really deny it. And I think that it really comes through in the book. So if Casey lost his faith, what he lost was he lost that connection to the conventional wisdom of religion, the kind of stuff that people say in church, the stuff that they follow mindlessly. And he sort of went with back to the truth of it, I think. At least that's how I read it, But I guess I wanted to answer your other question about whether or not we think that capitalism is the bad guy. And I think in a way it's portrayed that way because at that time, I guess, you hear a lot about in economics about something called a resource curse. So if a developing nation has something good like oil, that can really mess them up in a lot of economic ways. Misaligned incentives, as Joe Bullock pointed out, is one of them. And I think if there's a resource curse in the United States, it's land. That's the thing we had in abundance, and that we never really were managing too well. We were just allowing the market to wag the dog's tail there. So that's a long story short, but I do think that nowadays regulations and the idea that you can't just have this unfettered free market mythology running everything is actually a good thing. Now, whether we want to shade that into communism, probably not.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind seeing going towards socialism a little bit. I mean, I'm one of these people now that can say, don't touch my Medicare. And, I appreciate that. So I think as many people pointed out, policies, individual policies within the system that we have that go towards socialistic ideas, or if you want to call that being a social democrat, you can. I think that that's probably a good way to go. So I don't think, I think that the portrayal in the book is one-sided, but it did cause, he was focusing on a crisis. So it's understandable that he portrayed it that way.
Yeah, that's interesting. When I read the book, I looked at it less as a political statement when I compared it to what's going on today, and more of a kind of a cultural one. And I did agree with Steinbeck that individualism, kind of naked on its own, urges people to pursue personal achievements, which creates competition, and that can lead to lots of bad sort of anxiety and psychological problems. And there's sort of a focused attention that we have today on personal achievements, on taking care of yourself, what one can bear, and a significant cost on I think there's a significant cost that comes in play when talking about interpersonal relationships. Dan?
Hi. I wanted to say two things. One was that our idea of individuality, or even individualism, is, for better or worse, something that's culturally founded around Western thought. And in Western thought, the idea of individuality is that one has to stand out from the many. Whereas in Eastern thought, the idea of individuality is that how does one stand in to fit correctly with the rest of others? And so, even though we're arguing about the idea of collectivism versus individualism, it's presented in this like polemical way, which is designed to make it tear at the seams because everything is so far away from one another. That there's something in between that. And the idea that I kept thinking of was, and there was I don't know if I'm right, but I think a bit is about the I and the we. It reminds me very much of Emerson's Oversoul. So I'm just assuming that everybody's literate and they know what I'm talking about. So, I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, when I read that, my mind went straight to Emersonian thinking. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Dave?
Yeah, a little more background. This thing about capitalism, the golden or gilded age, 1880s, 1890s. There's an excellent documentary called The Men That Built America. But Commodore Vanderbilt had the railroads. J.D. Rockefeller, of course, had the oil. Andrew Carnegie Steel, and J.P. Morgan was the main banker. And we think of the rich folks, the billionaires going to space, but I think those days they had an even larger percentage of the nation's wealth than just a handful of people. So there's a terrible disparity between rich and poor. The interesting thing to me, there was a fellow that ran against McKinley, and I've forgotten his name, very much similar to Bernie Sanders, but was running as a populist, trying to preach to people, vote for me and I'll fix these things or whatever. Other great thoughts, but anyway, enough for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Joe?
Yeah, just briefly, I'll just say something to kind of bring this full circle is what I was saying, is sometimes we have misaligned incentives when it comes to economics. I think part of the problem is that we don't necessarily look at the whole problem. So if the value system only, if it's only for profits, and it doesn't necessarily include the whole of what you're trying to accomplish in a society, that it's only economic gain, that's where it kind of falls apart. Because now you're no longer looking at what the social values are as a system. You're only looking at it from one perspective. So it's the primacy of the motive, which is really kind of the issue. You only look at it very narrow, and you'll start to see people start to frame things. Well, it's like nature. Well, no, it's not nature. If you're saying like this spontaneous order for economics, people will often bring up, and that in and of itself, it's not natural, because you're only focusing on just one part of a whole entire system. You're not focusing on the health, the mental well-being, and all the other aspects of the system. And the other part is it ignores things like externalities, like where third parties are actually impacted by misaligned incentives. So I think that that's a really kind of critical part to this conversation, because a lot of people often will make an economic argument, but they're only looking at specifically one very narrow way of measuring progress within a society. It's not necessarily looking at the whole of society, which actually kind of gets to the collective part. So you don't necessarily need to sacrifice the individual in that framework either. So I think there's a spectrum here, but I also think that there's a narrow way of measuring progress that actually impacts how we determine what's successful and not. Anyway, just thought I'd make those comments.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting. Do you think that framework, that sort of objective economical framework or point of view, kind of hinders us, sort of alienates people, and kind of locks people into their own individual world? And do you think that that's good or bad?
I mean, I think it creates an environment where we're competing with one another, and then there's this kind of like consumerism aspect of it as well, that there's a need for growth in this model, and there's a need for more, as opposed to actually thinking about what actually what would be it promotes an unhealthy environment for where you actually continuously need more and you need growth, and it doesn't necessarily look at what the type of growth that what you're achieving in the process of growing, what you're actually sacrificing in the interim. So it doesn't look at long-term goals. And I also think it pins individuals against one another. So I think that that's very, it's dangerous. And then I think this is where sometimes in society that the idea of keeping up with the Joneses also separates us.
Yeah, thank you. So Abraham, I'm going to get to you in a second, but I also want to pose this question based off of what Joe was saying. So if we're going to assume the greater social crisis that Steinbeck is depicting in his book, meaning that the deterioration of the middle class economy and social bonds, things like that, does Steinbeck give us any solution or hope of solving this Western American dilemma? If we're going to, assume that this is in fact a problem. So Abraham has, I'll go with Abraham and then Larry.
Yeah, I was about to talk about the different thing, but it might be related to answering to some extent to your question. The other day I happened to watch YouTube video. This is a prank like 2 million subscribers, something like that. The line goes like this. This is a prank. But he's calling to his friend saying that I slept with your mom. So the friend shocked. So you will be my stepson soon. But people were laughing, hilarious. People surrounding the cafeteria because they overheard the phone conversation. So we call this one as tabloid, right? Kind of story. So when I read John Steinbeck's East of Eden, there is the female character, Kathy, I think. She burns down the house, killed his own parents. And then there is also a person called Samuel.
Well,
What I'm saying is,
if you can you stick with the
concluded.
book? Can you stick with Grapes of Wrath if you can?
No. What I'm about to saying is that the John Steinbeck does not say directly, but he used this the figure characters and symbols and the names stories to convey very higher form of morality. So I think that's his answer to what's going on with this depression and big companies and things like that. He doesn't give political answers, but he is resorting to more the unalienable rights, like that's Christian value, the image of God. That's where he's coming from, actually. That's how I see it. Yeah. He is not promoting individualism or collectivism. He's a standing different place. That's what I'm saying also. Yeah.
Thank you. Dan?
Larry's had his hand up for a long time.
Oh, Larry. Sorry, Larry. Yeah.
Steinbeck is not subtle in this book at all. He clearly sees capitalism that is completely concerned with profit as an enemy that is destroying human beings, destroying human potential. And I keep thinking there was the government camp that they went to that was very clean and everybody was given a job. So I thought Steinbeck was basically saying, we need these. People need help. The government has to come in and help people who, through no fault of their own or whatever, have fallen upon hard times. And like I said, this argument goes on right up until today. What role should the government play in our economic life? And at the time he wrote this book, there's no subtlety here. The government has to be involved, much more so than it was. It has to help these people. Look, the Jodes are decent people. They need help. They're not asking for a handout. They need help. And the government, he's telling the government, you have to come in and help these people. And the enemy here is pure capitalism, where profit is the only motive. You destroy the environment, you destroy people. We need regulation, we need unions, we need government action. And like I said, when I read this book, I said, this is not a subtle book at all. He's hitting capitalism right over the head, saying it's not working the way it's set up right now. The government has to be more active. And like I said, I think we're still having the same conversation. What exactly, how far should we have healthcare for everyone? Is that the role of the government, so to speak? And depending on where you stand in the political spectrum, but at the time he wrote this book, he was looking at capitalism as it failed.
Yeah.
He had a depression. It wasn't working. Therefore, the government needed to take action. We needed unions. And he was saying also that the religious community should be more aligned with the socialist point of view. Connected, we're interconnected, we're dependent on each other. We look after one another. And like I said, I didn't think this book was kind of like dancing around the issue. I think Steinbeck was trying to hit people over the head, saying, get up and do something. That's why I wonder, in our contemporary world, is this book outlawed in certain school districts? Because it sees capitalism as the enemy. That's it.
Yeah. Thanks, Larry. Yeah, I think that's right. It's it's very like I said, it's very didactic. It's very to the point, and there's a evil villain in this book, and that's capitalism, right? And I think that one of the things that whether you agree with that or not, if in the book, if you see one of the things that that capitalism sort of destroys, it destroys social entities like families and groups of people who can rely on each other, and it also destroys social entities like communities, right? Community, sort of these affect label relationships among individuals, right? It's sort of, it destroys that. So yeah, if you take a look at the book. So Dan.
Hi. I want to try to answer your question that you asked. And that is, if individualism isn't going to be the answer, and collectivism isn't going to be the answer, what is? That is, that if we put on one side, let's say, an economic or an ecosystem, a social ecosystem, where there's scarcity, where there has been economic collapse, also ecological collapse due to this infinite growth. So on one side, Steinbeck is saying that it's this presence of too much selfishness. That is the problem, the source of it, right? And the selfishness in this way isn't the kind of Socratic, long game type of selfishness where you understand what's in your best interest is what's in other people's best interest. We're not talking about that. We're talking about egoism or egotism, not egoism in its proper way. But the other half of this, I think, is exemplified by the ending of the book. What's her name? Rose something?
Rose of Sharon.
She feeds a person who's starving. She has nothing, but she has a dead child. But I think to Steinbeck, this is symbolically the answer. The answer is kindness. Kindness is this way of getting around the collectivism, the monster of that, and that of individualism, the monster of that too. So that's what came to mind.
Do you think that Steinbeck portrayed the monster of collectivism?
I think, no, not Steinbeck himself. I'm saying that if these types of symbols are used in a polemical way, that is, they're placed artificially at extremes, when that's placed into the literature, it's going to have to seem, for example, for the capitalists, any form of collectivism is a bad thing. Whether that's like the idea of unions, which Jim Clay, is that what his last? He gets killed because he's trying to unionize people. He's trying to get them to collectively find a way to negotiate, a standard of living. Whereas, as I'm saying, that they're standing up against nature, which it has gone through an ecological collapse and an economic collapse. So because the depression is being resolved by those two forces, we have to understand that ecologically there's scarcity. And so the big fish in that lake is going to eat. None of the other fish are going to eat. And so, yes, it's in favor of that type of individualism, that monster bank, if you will. On the other hand, that we have given another symbol I think in the beginning of the book with the land turtle that gets turned over and then finds a way to turn itself back over and continue. And that's the idea that resilience and perseverance are going to matter in that stressed ecology that we call our world, our modern world. So I don't think I have anything else.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. One of the scenes that really stood in my mind was the scene in the book where they it was one of the it was one of the chapters the interlude chapters where and the farmers had too much corn, I think it was, and instead of giving it away, because if they gave it away, it would drive the price of corn down. I think it was corn, but it would drive the price down. So they couldn't give it away, even though the people are starving. So they were spraying the food down with chemicals while everybody lots and lots of people around them are starving. And that image really stood in my head as like, wow, okay, like this, he's really picking a side here, Steinbeck, it's depicting this as really horrific. Barbara?
Well, it's interesting. I think that a couple people, and Dan just now was identifying this is a polemic, and it is, so clearly Steinbeck wants us to think a certain way about it. But, what occurred to me as I was listening to Dan talk, and he was saying how, compassion and selflessness seemed to be the answer that Steinbeck was going towards. I thought to myself, I wonder really if it's just that, or whether it's the idea that eventually you have to take a stand and you have to choose a side and you have to put yourself on the line and take that risk. And even if it turns into a disaster for you, it's not just the idea that you have to have compassion, but you actually have to make a sacrifice, or you have to stand up. And that, I think, is pretty radical. So if anybody was going to ban this book, yeah, I don't know where it would be banned, actually, if you look at it that way, because that's a position that most that's why Tom's so interesting, because once you take that position, you're an individual again. You may be standing up for a side or for other people, but you can only do that as an individual, and you can only put your own body on the line, right? So it's just a thought that occurred to me while Dan was talking.
Yeah, good point. And towards the end of the book, Tom does make a decision, right? And he does it, and we see him do it through the famous dialogue that at the end of the book, where wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there, right? And wherever so and so is going on, I'll be there, right? And so he makes a decision that, yeah, he's going to separate himself from the family, but he's also going to be a proponent of this this idea that what's going on right now is wrong, and I'm going to stand up for the little guy. Yeah, does anybody else have anything to say on the subjects we've been talking about?
Does anybody know if Steinbeck was observed by the government? Did he have an FBI file type of thing? I would think he would. I would think that the powers that be saw him as an agitator. Unions were not very popular in the 40s. They're still not popular, which I find rather interesting, that the capitalists in the contemporary world are still trying to push unions away. In 1940, they were considered so anti-capitalist. They were communists, they were socialists, they went against the very fabric of our culture. And I imagine, I don't know, that there were powers in the government, in the FBI or whatever, that had a file on Steinbeck or were watching him, because he was an influential writer and he was advocating radical change. He was advocating for unions. He was advocating for the government to get involved in the economy. And at that particular time, that was a very radical, well, I guess it still is, depending on your point of view. At that particular time, it was a very, very radical position to take, because hands off capitalism, let the markets determine everything. And he was pointing out that isn't working. It's a failure. And the other book that came out in 1940 was Native Son, which attacked the racist problem in the United States. So all of a sudden in 1940, two very popular books attacking capitalism and attacking racial inequities in the United States were both on the bestseller list. And I think in 1940, after the Depression, people were much more open to the government involvement. And that's what I think led to Roosevelt's New Deal and Social Security and Medicare and all these other programs that we take for granted now. But as I said before, this book is not in any way subtle about it.
Yeah.
Capitalism is not working. It is exploiting people. It is hurting people. The government cannot sit idly by. The government has to get involved. And that's why I think back to the government camp that they went to. They had flushing toilets that were flushing. And if you saw the movie, the person who was in charge of the camp looked like FDR. So I think he is taking a very proactive stance here saying this isn't working. We need a more active government. Call it socialism, give it any name you want, call it collectivism, give it any name you want, but he's saying we cannot go on this way. And I think we're still having this kind of debate over what is the proper role for the government in our economic life.
Yeah, so I mean, Steinbeck does bring that up. What's the proper goal of the government? I think he also brings up what's the proper goal. What's the proper? How should the people act, right? Too, if they're going to be in this situation, right? If
you recall in the beginning of the book, when they were on the farm, there was one guy who stood behind. And he was like a ghost. He says, I'm not leaving my land. And he has a rifle with him. And I was like saying, this guy's out of his mind. He's going to get killed.
Grandpa.
And I think the real point he's making is that this problem cannot be addressed in isolation. We have to address it collectively.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a collective response to the devastation and to the misfortune that people are undergoing. And I think all of the government programs that came after with the New Deal were right on that. They were saying we need Social Security, we need Medicare, on and on and on. How far should we go? That's the contemporary argument and debate that we're having right now.
Yeah, so I think a lot's been said in the book and in our discussion about what's negative about individualism. So it's corrosive because it drives people apart from one another. We become alienated, locked into our own individual worlds, right? People become, you might even say people become objects that we can use to get what we want instead of people, right? But also there are positives with individualism that we should take into account when reading The Grapes of Wrath. Like, one is that it enables individuals to act autonomously and choose freely, right? People are able to choose whom they interact with more. People in individualistic cultures can have a strong sense of self-efficacy. It has more social mobility, meaning you can go you have the ability to jump classes and move up in class or down in class, right? There's mobility right there, and I think that those are some positives about individualism. So I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, yeah, all this stuff is bad, but I think, like Dan said, maybe maybe we can have some sort of a balance, or something like that.
We need to have a stag. That's the problem. The Depression, the way it really ended was that America got involved in World War II, and that became the stag. And so you had a whole America that was isolationistic, that was individualistic, anti-war because of the first Great War. They didn't want to get involved in the second one. You also had rampant anti-Semitism throughout the continental US. But when we found ourselves at war, it changed our ethics drastically because we started having to sacrifice for that. We had to come together and put that kind of individualism. We had to not necessarily repress it. We had to compartmentalize it so that it would fit with that kind of collective need that was necessary. And that's why we still call them the greatest generation.
They had to put their individualism,
They had to compartmentalize it so it would function in that collective.
Yeah, so they had to put their individualistic kind of mentality aside for a collective mentality of the nation, is what you're saying, right?
Steinbeck never doesn't denigrate the individual, especially with a character like Tom, there's a certain individual quality to him. His point is we need unions, we need government action, we need a collective response to common problems. And
well, there's other like historical events that follow this narrative. In Rome, I think 131 BCE, before Common Era, there was a movement done by two different brothers, Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus. And they came from patrician houses. They were conscripted to lead the centurions to war. But when the veterans came back to Rome, the Republic, the Senate, had liquidated all the land. There was no land for the people, for the hoi polloi to go back to their farming, to go back to their life. Even though the doors of Janus had now opened, that we were now in peace, this still didn't change anything with the powers that be. And so the Gracchus brothers got involved, and one brother got assassinated by the Senate, and the second one decided to kill himself later on, just so that he wouldn't be killed by the Senate himself. But what inevitably happened was that the Senate won that argument because they steamrolled right over the populace, and it didn't really matter because the populace had to repair itself over time. And so if you understand that kind of point of view, you have the Gracchus brothers, then you have Julius Caesar, then you have the empire. So in some ways, republics and democracies both inevitably lead to this kind of liquidation of power. One could say that it's because those systems are always designed as ships of fools, because they don't have a conscience to properly guide them to the right kind of shore where there could be the right things. And so inevitably systems like this collapse and fall into tyranny and dictatorships and despots and things like this historically, because the truth is that history is written by the individuals themselves. That is, 8 to 12 billion people in the last 100,000 years, for which under 3,000 of them have been written about in the history books. 3,000. So few out of so many who have lived, breathed, and died.
My question is this. Do you think Steinbeck would be pleased with the America that we're living in today, with all of the changes from 1940, when he wrote this book, until the present time? Would he find all of the social programs adequate? Or would he think that there's a lot more work that needs to be done? I mean, like, you could say, should we have universal health care? Should the government be doing that? And how does you pay for it? And that's a part of me that wonders, would he be like with Bernie Sanders yelling for socialism, that we have to go further? Or would he say, hey, he's very impressed with what changes have been made in our culture, in our political environment?
Yeah,
I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's the real question that the book.
Yeah, I think that Steinbeck would be horrified with what has happened. I mean, so here we are living in America, or at least I am. A lot of us are, and the ideology is to there's an American idea that you are the most important, and what you want is the most important, and your job is to gratify your own desires. One could argue that that's the ethos in U.S. culture today, and it hasn't, and it's only been getting stronger. So I think that he would not be too happy, but also I'd like to point out that the solution that Steinbeck has in his novel isn't necessarily a political action. Like we need to move to communism, right? We need to move to the far left. He has that, but it's not necessarily all of that. I don't think. It's not necessarily that there needs to be more government presence. I think one main solution that Steinbeck portrays is to lose yourself in the role you play in the community, in family, friends, and people, and sort of this sort of this bottom up approach, which I think he has in his novel.
I don't think Steinbeck is saying, here's the solution to the problem. But I think he's saying, here's the problem. Here are some things we can and must do in order to address the problem. Look, you may be right. He might look at today's world saying, look, we're ruining the environment. We're running out of oil. We have global warming, and we're exploiting people, on and on and on. He also might be pleased with some of the changes that we made. I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know how far we should go with government kind of taking care of us, if you will, or serving us. And I think that's kind of like the middle ground, where how far should we go towards socialism, so to speak? Should we have, what do we do with people who are in poverty? How do we take care of children? Should people be given time off when they have kids? All of these things that many people are suggesting that the government get involved in, they are being debated right now. And that's why I think Steinbeck just jumped right into I think he saw the problem and he jumped right into the debate, saying, we cannot go on the way we're going on. And there are people today who are saying the same thing, or similar types of things. There are all types of stories of apocalypse. But Steinbeck, I think, having lived through the Depression and saw people, decent people, who are being just crushed through no fault of their own. Maybe it was fault to a degree. Maybe even if it was their fault, maybe they planted the wrong crops. They deserved help. They needed help. And I think that's what the plea is in this book. Let's help these people to get back on their feet. They weren't looking for a handout. They were looking for work. And I think that's the kind of role that he saw that government needed to step in, give these people some sort of a foundation upon which to build their lives back up. And the book is unsparing in its criticism.
The critique that I have with what you're saying, Larry, is that I think that, and Dave, I'm gonna get to you in a second, that I don't think Steinbeck is necessarily saying that the answer lies in the government, right? He's not. I think that he's showing the answer can come from bottom up. And he's showing that through Tom Joad, who at the end of the book chooses to act and help his fellow man, right?
And Jim Casey.
And Jim Casey, sure, yeah.
And Jim Casey, I agree with you. I agree.
Yeah, and he shows that, you know, then the book Rose of Sharon is you know, chooses to help this man in the only way that she could, right? And I think that here are solutions that aren't necessarily political, but you can you can actually do yourself, right? And he's showing that. So Dave.
Yeah, thanks. A couple things about what we're experiencing right now. Almost every major intersection in my city has beggars. We're the richest country in the world. In Pierce County, where I live, I think we have 3,000 homeless. Richest country in the world. In jail, I think they say about 30% of the people in jail are mentally ill. Jail is expensive. They could be treated in a mental health institute for far less money. Same with a lot of in there with addiction, opioids and alcohol. Head Start. I heard once that $1 spent on Head Start saves $8 in the long run, because so many are going to end up in jail or in a nowhere career or whatever. But we've got people saying, well, the government can't spend any money. Don't spend any money. Well, except the military. You have billions for the military. But I'm really interested. We had a nice thunderstorm going through, or tornado going through Kentucky that leveled a bunch of the state. And I suspect the senators there against spending anything or anywhere probably want some government money. But we need to invest in our people and take care of our people. Oh, the other thing was in the Depression, I think my buddy Mikey was talking about the unemployment. I believe the unemployment went up to 24%. People had been saying, oh, the poor, they're just lazy bums. If they just go out and get a job, you know, they'll lift up their bootstraps and they'll be wonderful. But when the unemployment gets up to 24%, you start thinking, is there a problem here? And the other thing is, this is 70 years after the Civil War, and our country was only 150 years old by that. And they were very afraid, and that's one thing that pushed Roosevelt, that there might be a rebellion and we might lose democracy completely. Of course, we're talking about that right now. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks. Dan, your hand up?
Yes. There's a movie titled Killing Them Softly. And it's about the mafia and how, in some ways, the black market is insulated. And when the larger market collapses, people become more desperate. And one of the last lines in the movie, and I want to read it here, is spoken by a character who's an antagonist protagonist. His name is Jackie Cogan, very JC about it, by the way. So he says something to this extent. This guy tells me we're living in a community. Don't make me laugh. I'm living in America, and in America, you're on your own. America is not a country. It's just a business. You know, fucking pay me.
Right. Yeah, that's the attitude that Steinbeck is going against, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Abraham.
Yeah, I was listening to people. I forgot what I was about to say, but I will say what appears in my mind. So the Steinbeck's hyper-realism, I would say, I think it's again stemming from the Bible. the book of Jeremiah. If you are familiar with the literature of Bible, what Steinbeck is trying to say is not shocking or new. Most things are already there. So I think he is using his ability as a writer to convey how he sees the world. Again, I don't think Steinbeck, the person I understood reading one of his books, he is not communist. He definitely defined what is good, what is bad, but he does not say it directly, in my understanding. That's my understanding. Yeah, that's pretty much.
Yeah, Abraham, I think if you would read The Grapes of Wrath, I think you would see that he's pretty left-leaning. He's pretty for some sort of social government, right? So yeah.
Just short. No, I'm not denying that much of Christianity contains much of socialistic ideas already there. Golden rule, love your neighbor as thyself. And that's what I'm saying. So it's not new. That's my point. It's not from socialism or collectivism. Yeah.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. So I guess I'm gonna ask one more question, and then it's getting close to 8 o'clock, and then we're gonna start wrapping up. And then I'll be, I think I'm gonna still be on if people want to discuss this topic further. So today, now when we look at today, is American society, Western society, American society, indeed in dismay? I think this topic has been brought up too, and how can we take these lessons that we've learned from this book, whether we agree with them or not, and apply them to the society that we have today, whether you want to call it individualistic society, postmodern society, free market capitalist society. How can we take this book and apply it to today? How can this help shape our perspective on things going on? Barbara?
I see Joe Bullock has his hand up. Do you want to go, Joe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll take a crack at it. I think today that one thing is that just whether it's collectivist or individualist, and yet putting that all aside, I think the bigger problem is today is that we're so polarized, and for whatever reason that exists, whether it's because we are such a individualistic culture or not, we can argue about that. But the problem now is that we're completely dysfunctional. Whereas before, at least people would try and solve the problem, I think, a little bit when this book came out. People like the New Deal or things like that. There were things that were being debated about how to approach this. But right now, unfortunately, we're just looking at it as stopping each other from from attaining any kind of progress. So like we can't even solve basic problems today. Whereas before, I think I think the thing that the Grapes of Wrath could give to us is that the idea of just basically coming together collectively to try and solve a problem, period. Not necessarily an ideology or anything along those lines, but the idea that maybe just trying to address the fundamental problem of polarization. I think that would probably be the most powerful thing, if I had to guess. That's just off the top of my head.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So I think one could argue that we are polarized because we have the freedom to be polarized. And that freedom comes from this hyper individualism that we have, which could be an argument, I guess.
You know
Barbara?
what, Joe? I was going to say that we have the freedom to be polarized because we don't have to take the consequences anymore, the economic consequences of some of the worst things that happened and caused the depression. So monetary policy and other things are very closely watched now. And people don't know much about much, so they can sort of sit in their sandboxes and throw stuff at each other because they don't really have to face what's going on. It's almost as if the people at the top have sort of sprayed us with something to make us fall asleep. And that is some sort of economic security, whatever it's worth. But I agree with Joe that maybe the answer is some sort of localism, some sort of, I mean, you can't have a community in a big diverse country like this and call it one thing. But so all you can really do is have the kind of community maybe that was what I grew up in, was a neighborhood or a section of one city where people kind of had the same agenda, worked towards the same things, had the same, I wouldn't say naturally they all had the same belief system, but they had enough in common that when the chips were down, absolutely, if you were one of us, you would be helped. And if you had enough of that, and maybe if they were connected in some way in a network, then you would have a healthier society. But that is, I think, a dream. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I think it's, I mean, you could argue that it's a good dream to have. I think the reality might be that if some sort of community were to sort of arise and have this sort of unified outlook on life, then that it would be stomped out by whoever has you know, by the individualists who can have the most money and the most power, and they're more likely to succeed than but yeah, that's just something that came to mind off the top of my head. Okay.
I lived in China for a while and I saw the nightmare of unified thinking, where the government controlled information and ideas. And I'm not terribly optimistic about America today. We can't even agree what the problem is. We can't even agree on a quote unquote objective truth or consensus on anything. I mean, I'm having a running debate with somebody now. Every time there's a gun shooting, a shooting in a school, politicians yell, it's a mental health problem. And I look at that and say, no, it's a gun problem. And all of a sudden we're going back and forth. We need better mental health facilities. And I said, no, we need better gun registration and background checks and on and on and on. And I'm like saying, this is like a problem that's not going to be even addressed. We're just going to have to live with shootings in school. I know that there's another one coming. And I said, all right, it's just part of our life in America today. So I'm not terribly optimistic. I kind of blame the technological landscape that we're living in, misinformation, and every idiot moron gets the opportunity to express his or her points of view out there. So yeah, we need a better educated public, so to speak, but I'm not terribly optimistic about even agreeing what the problems are. Look, if we all agreed, hey, there's a problem of homelessness, I say, okay, we could disagree on how do you resolve that problem. We can't even agree on what the problem is. And that to me is the real problem what we're going through right now. I mean, we could fight about abortion.
Yeah.
There's a certain comfort in that because it's yes or no type of thing. But I'm like saying, okay, we can't agree. A consensus is global warming man-made. And I'm saying there are people who disagree or agree or whatever. And I'm like saying, wait a second, first you have to have consensus. Say, here is a problem. How do we address it? Then you could debate what should we do? How do we pay for it? On and on. We don't even have those discussions anymore. So I'm not very optimistic about America these days.
Yeah. And when Steinbeck was writing, he definitely wasn't optimistic about his America, right? You could say. So let's see. It's 8 o'clock, 8:08. I'm gonna officially end this. But I think if we want, we can keep talking. If anybody has, I saw Joe's hand was raised and somebody else's if they want to make some further points. Abraham.
Yeah, I've been in the US about 9 years now, and I am learning what I can say, what I cannot say. I mean, I'm talking about taboos and myths. Okay, this culture, I'm not saying I'm better or less, just I'm learning, I'm getting assimilated, educated. So this topic might touch a little bit of taboo. Americans don't talk about mostly. What I'm saying is why we are so polarized. I think many individuals are not really content because of family disintegration. What I heard is that currently about 30% of males in their 20s, if I remember correctly, podcast, they are forced virgin because of Tinder. On the other hand, 1/3 of women in their 20s, I would say, using Tinder, they are choosing only 4% of male, hyper males. So a lot of males currently, they don't even have a chance to talk and date with any girl. 30% about virgin now, forced virgin. So if someone is in that category, many things might sound like bullshit because he doesn't have decent recognition from opposite sex. This is one example. So why is it so polarized? I think the family, the value of family and the prospect of having family, it's getting low for many people. I'm a little worried actually about this situation.
Thanks. Joe?
Yeah, I do think the environment I think the problems are similar, but